Really glad you're with us. You've heard me talk about this for several weeks now, and I don't think it's an overstatement. This is an historic day for the life of our church. We've had a couple days like this, but this is different as we talk about kind of the next chapter for our church. And so this is not going to be a normal message. The next 2 weeks of the series will be a little more normal. I'm going to dig into a passage of scripture the way I normally do. So do not miss, you heard me say this so much, don't miss a week of this series. So I'm glad you're here today. Some of you aren't. We'll see you next week. But don't miss a week of this series. But because of what we're talking about, I want to just kind of talk to you. And I want to talk about this next chapter for us. And part of this is just going to kind of be a reminder, and then I'll get to the big idea today. And here's what I'd say. If you're brand new with this, if you're a guest, I'm so glad you're here. You don't have to do anything I'm about to talk about. But this will give you, I think, an incredible glimpse into what we're about as a church and where we're going. And that might be really relevant to you, especially depending on your church background. But if you would say, this is my church, whether you've been here 4 months or 4 weeks or 14 years, for many of you, I know a lot of the stories as I look around in the room, your life has been transformed by what God is doing through this place, through this movement. If you would say this is my church, here's the big idea up front, because I want to tell you exactly where we're going to go. Today, we're going to reimagine together creating more physical space, creating more space to reach more people with the life and freedom of Jesus. And if you know, hopefully you've been around here for 30 seconds, you know this is what we're all about, is leading people to life and freedom in Jesus. That is the entire makeup and strategy of our church. We want everybody to know. Now, here's the thing. For some of you, I'm going to ask you to do something that I would define as big and bold as we get to the end. So I don't want to be shady. So I'm just going to tell you where we're going. I'm going to ask some of you, or a lot of you who would call Centerpoint your home, I'm going to ask you to do something that may make you kind of uncomfortable. And I'm good with that. You might not be, but I'm good with that. In fact, I'm excited about that because no overstatement, for hundreds of you that are a part of our church, what I'm going to ask you to do is going to be a defining faith story for you. Maybe a defining faith story for your family. And the reason that I know that is because that has been my experience. And I'm talking a lot today out of my experience. And I'm going to ask you to do something similar to what, no over-exaggeration, has defined and shaped my faith, in a lot of ways defined and shaped my life. I'd even go a step further. I think for our church, I think this is an incredible moment with all that God is already doing. I think it's an incredible moment to write a story, and I think it will be a story for us as a church to write and to tell about God's faithfulness as we step out in faith and as we talk about this next chapter in the life of our church. So here's what I'd say to some of you, though, that are in the room, and I'm going to ask you to stand or a raise of hands, but you already know what I'm talking about. You already have one of those faith-defining stories because you are one of the small group of people that stepped out and you decided to write the first chapter of our church's story. And I'll talk about in a minute, there wasn't a lot of us. In fact, I had several meetings recently where I asked people who's been here 3 years or more, and basically nobody's hand went up. So a lot of you are brand new to this and what God is doing here, but there's some of you that you already have some faith-defining stories where you were asked to step way out in faith and to stretch yourself and to do some things that were really uncomfortable. And you wrote the first chapter of our church's story because you went first and you reimagined a different kind of church in our community. A church that we would eventually call an alternative to church as usual for all people. And hopefully when we say all people, we legitimately mean all people. And that for a lot of people, and some of you are shaking your heads because this is your story, your usual wasn't great. And so we wanted to reimagine a different kind of church in our community. And you did this and you stepped up and literally you built it. You financially made it happen when there was just a few of us. You sacrificed more than anybody is ever going to know. Nobody's ever going to know what you've done. You began to write the story. You served. You volunteered. You did way more than you should have done. And you wrote the first chapter of creating an alternative to church as usual for all people. And for a lot of people, that's just become normal now. One of the things I think about with my kids is this is just normal for my kids. This is just how they expect church to be. And for a lot of you, that's been your story, that what started as an alternative to church as usual has just become normal for so many people. It's normal for kids to show up in preschool and cry when they have to leave, not cry when they're coming. Some of you cried every week going to church growing up because this was going to be another flannel graph story of Jonah and you couldn't take any more of it. You know what I'm talking about? And literally every weekend, hundreds of kids, no exaggeration, show up and they love the church. They cry when they leave. Imagine if that had been your experience. We have students that show up every single Wednesday night, and what has become normal for us is we have over 100 students who attend every single Wednesday night. And they show up and they cannot wait to hang out and get into small groups. And they talk about things that you can't even imagine. And they do it in the church, things I would have never talked about in the church. Because we've created a safe place for them, and we believe the faith of the next generation is worth everything. And by the way, over 50% of these students have zero church background. Over 50% of these students, their parents are not connected to a church. Many of them have never been connected to a church. And this just become normal when you show up on a Wednesday night. This is just what happens. It's become normal, and some of you, it's your story. For people to say, I just never felt like I was at home in the church in my entire life because of a past, because I wasn't religious, because I was hurt, I have trauma, whatever. And then you finally hear the story or they send it in of this is the first time I have ever felt like the church is home for me. And that's just become normal. We celebrate those stories in our all staff meetings every single week. Not a week that goes by we don't celebrate those stories or read those stories. It's become normal for people to talk about that this was the church that finally led their adult kid back to faith, only church they connected to, or spouses talking about their husband finally wants to come to church for the first time in their life, probably because I talk about the Bucks all the time, but whatever it is, like you're here, that's become normal. It's become normal. Man, this is so crazy to me. It's become normal for like the pothead and the Sunday school kid to show up and sit right next to each other, which is the kind of church we wanted to create. And it's 2024, so funny twist. Some of you were the Sunday school kid and you become the pothead. So that you didn't see that coming. I mean, it's gummies, but still, but where we would inspire people to follow Jesus without watering anything down because Jesus is the lead story. And then simultaneously, every single weekend, there's agnostics and there's skeptics and atheists sitting right next to 30-year followers of Jesus. And nobody blinks an eye. Nobody even thinks about it because it's just normal to create a place where you can belong before you believe. It's become normal for us to grow multiculturally, multi-generationally, multi-ethnically, socioeconomically diverse, when I'm just telling you that's not happening in many places right now in our culture, especially within the church. And you've been on the front lines of that. And it's just become normal. It's become normal. And I kind of hate this. It breaks my heart. It becomes normal for people to talk to us or write to us. Our comms teams get this all the time and go, okay, you say that everybody's welcome, but are they really welcomed? Like, are we really welcome? They tell their story because everybody stencils out on a wall, but are we really welcomed? And then literally, I've seen so many individuals where eventually tears well up in their eyes because they have been invited by somebody to volunteer. And for the first time in their life, they actually feel like they're a part of the church. They feel like they're a part of what they've never felt a part of before. And that has just become normal. And there's some of you that pioneered to do that, to create an alternative to church as usual because you took Peter seriously. These are my favorite verses. You reimagined a church that did not make it difficult for people who are, what's the word? People who are turning to God. You didn't make it difficult. And again, not that the invitation, it doesn't have an unbelievably high price. Jesus paid everything for this message of good news for all people. It's not that somehow, we water anything down. Jesus is the lead story. And Jesus paid a high price for everybody to be invited in, but it shouldn't be difficult. And for some of you, I don't mean this is overly critical. The church has just made it too difficult a lot of times. It's just made it too hard. And it shouldn't be hard for a student who has questions to begin to turn to God. The church shouldn't make that difficult. It shouldn't be hard for a neighbor who is turning to God but has, questions or is skeptical. It shouldn't be hard for a family member, somebody who's struggling in a marriage to turn to God even though their marriage is a mess. It shouldn't be hard for your gay brother to turn to God who's wondering whether he's welcome. It shouldn't be hard for an adult kid to turn to God who's in addiction because the message of Jesus is for the entire world and it's not without a price. But come on, the message or the invitation and our ability to receive it is easy. And so we shouldn't make it difficult for anybody to be able to turn to God. And for so many of you, that's what you've done. That's what you pioneered. That's what you volunteered around. That's what you've given your money toward. And can I just, this quick side note, and what we're doing isn't about style. And by the way, I want to say this, everybody's clear. I love the church everywhere. I love what God is doing in churches all over our community. I'm a second generation pastor. My dad was a pastor. I'm a big fan of local church, every style, every denomination. As long as Jesus is the thing, I'm all about that. My point is just this. God's called you to something unique. God has called you to do something unique in our community and unique in our city. And it's not about the style. We get accused of that sometimes. Style is never what we're after because there's other churches in our area, they have a similar style. But it's not about style. Because through the lights and the fog, there's still a lot of people who don't feel like they belong or they're welcomed in the church. This is about a culture that you have created and pioneered that's reaching some people that nobody else is reaching in our community. And again, some of you are nodding your heads because you were those people or your kids were those people. And I mean this when I say this because we hear from them every single weekend. I was given church one last shot and this was finally the place that connected me. I was away for a decade. I had such a bad experience. I didn't want to be a part of it. I mean, legitimately, I had a Sunday where I walked away. And I mean, I grew up like real conservative background. I walked away, there was a former Baptist that I met, a former Catholic, somebody coming out of Wicca, somebody in Buddhism, and then somebody who was agnostic. And I walked away, I was like, what is happening here? Like, what in the world is going on? That's not normal. But you are literally reaching some people that nobody else is reaching in our city and our community. But here's the thing about it for all of us. There's a bunch more people in our city, whether you realize it or not, in our community, in your neighborhoods, that have a desire to turn to God. And the church has got to stop making it difficult. We got to stop making it overly difficult or hard. And I'll tell you, and I'll try to keep it together because I didn't real well at the first service. But I feel this so deeply. I feel this, and I can honestly say this, I feel it right now more than I felt it when we started this, more than at any point in our journey. And I talked about a faith-defining story. One of the faith-defining stories for me of a couple that I'll share, and some of you have heard this in Discover CC, but it was right after I graduated from business school. I went to the marketplace, and I met a girl by the name of Lauren. And we became really good friends, and she was open to Jesus, but she had so much resistance with the church. I mean, so much baggage. And I grew up in the church, and I honestly, I'm so grateful. Early age, I was taught the message of Jesus. I embraced Christ, and there almost wasn't a time I didn't know of the forgiveness and the love of Christ and the fact that even on my worst day that I was loved. I mean, and I just so badly wanted her to experience that. And so I invited her to church. And she had a terrible experience. I mean, it's an absolutely terrible experience. And so then I had to like backtrack because it made it all complicated. I was like, well, just forget the church. Just focus on Jesus. But it just kind of confirmed, I mean, right or wrong, it confirmed all the things that she felt, the suspicions she felt, that maybe they weren't actually answering the questions that she was asking. Felt a little bit judgmental, even though that probably wasn't their heart. Felt a little complicated. She didn't understand some of the language. And everybody said, again, because everybody puts this on a wall, that everybody said that she was welcome, but she kind of felt like I'm welcome. But then there was this hidden kind of, but you better get your crap together. Anybody know what I'm talking about? And so it just hit a dead end, and it broke my heart. And the thing about it, that church believed all the right things. I mean, if that's even possible. But as far as I was concerned, like they believed a lot of things that I believed, but they just made it so difficult for her. And my heart broke because I cared so much about her being introduced and transformed by this message. And this is gonna sound so over the top, and I don't mean it to because I try to resist this kind of thing, but it just anchored something to me. At that point in my life, I was not planning on being a pastor. That was not a part of my goals. And God just anchored something in my heart about creating what eventually would be called an alternative to church as usual for all people, because I broke for her story. And I broke for the story of a lot of other people, because here's the thing. I love the church, second generation pastor, but there's a lot of churches that they're all about truth. But there's thousands of unchurched people in our neighborhood that are not being reached. And there's a bunch with cool lights and some fog and a great band, but people still don't feel like they're welcome. Our area didn't need another church. I was convinced it needed a different kind of church. I mean, there's a ton of churches. It's like every time I think something cool is being built in our area, it's another car wash. Like, I think the same is true of the church. Like, there's a lot of churches. We didn't need another church. And I know some of you will feel this, but my heart broke for Lauren, honestly. And I would pray for her. We eventually lost contact, but I would pray for her constantly. And then for some college buddies that I had who had a similar experience. And then I looked this up when we were starting the church, and I would hang it in my office for the 60,000 unchurched, unreached, de-churched in a few mile radius. And you can talk about all the churches you want in the world, but most churches, this is not a shot, are just designed for church people. What about reaching both at the same time? And what about the 60,000 people that don't know the hope and the life that's only found in Jesus? What are we going to do about them? Like how are we going to reach them? And so a small group of people, and I mean a small group of people, set out to create a church that would tear away every unnecessary barrier for people to find life and freedom in Jesus. Because isn't it true? A lot of people haven't actually walked away from Jesus. They walked away because of the unnecessary barriers that got in the way. And again, we should preach Jesus. I mean, I get accused of all kinds of stuff all the time from the outside, and that's fine. But we want to preach the scriptures, and we want to preach Jesus. But what we're saying is, get all the other unnecessary stuff out of the way. and make it about Jesus. I mean, this is exactly what Paul said we should do when he wrote to the church. And by the way, I say this all the time, just so we're clear. You're the church. If you're a part of Centerpoint, you're the church. You are our church. You are your church. We are the church. The scriptures couldn't be more clear about that. That's why anytime somebody comes to me, and I shouldn't do this, but anytime somebody comes to me, they're like, well, can somebody from the church? I'm like, well, that's you. What are you about to ask you to do? Because you're the church. But we think it's somebody else. It's not. And for some of us, this may be the first time we have that realization that we are the church, you are the church. And so here's what Paul says to us in these extraordinary words in 2 Corinthians, that this is God's mission, that God is doing what? That God is present tense, still doing it every single day, doing it this morning, that God is reconciling the world, even the people you hate. God is reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not what? Counting men's sins against them, women's sins against them, teenagers, 7-year-olds, 70-year-olds. That your past may be a hang up for you, your dysfunction, your porn addiction, what you did 7 years ago. The fact that you walked out on God and basically gave him the finger for a period of your life, like you may hold all that against you, but you just need to know the message of the gospel and the good news is that God has removed every barrier to you having a reconciled relationship with him other than your decision to say yes. And so should the church. Listen, I'm not saying we shouldn't preach hard things because Jesus is hard. Jesus is the one that said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father but by me. That's exclusive. That's difficult. So we're okay with that being a barrier, but we don't want to be the barrier to be a jerk in the parking lot. We don't want to be the barrier on the stage spewing hate or being unnecessarily offensive. We don't want to be the barrier bringing your kids to church and your kids hating church. Like one of my seminary professors, I'll never forgot it, said, it is a sin to bore people with the Bible. Howard Hendricks, and I never forgot it. That we don't want any of that. What's going to be offensive, if anything is offensive, is Jesus. But everything else can be moved out of the way because we need to do what Jesus did, and that is, do you know you can be reconciled to God? And the only thing that's going to get in the way is not our parking and the fact that the children's ministry is a mess or the guy on stage is unbelievably offensive. The offensive part is going to be Jesus and Jesus' claims and Jesus' invitation. The only barrier should be your decision of whether you're going to follow Jesus or not. That's what the church has been called to do. In fact, he says this, if you don't believe me, he says this next. And he is committed to us. This is so crazy. The message of reconciliation, bringing what's broken back into relationship, bringing what is lost and seeing it found as though God, this is crazy to me. We're making his what? Appeal through us. That us is the church, you is the church, because you're the church, we're the church, I'm the church. That God is making his appeal in our community, in our city, in your neighborhood, in your home, and he's doing it through you. I mean, of all the things he could have chosen, he chose us busted up people to be his mouthpiece, to appeal to the world and to appeal to our city and to our community with a message of hope to the world. And it's why the church should be the safest place in the world for anybody struggling with anything. I know you have a past. I know you're dysfunctional. I know there's all kind of baggage. This is the message of the church. Do you know you can be reconciled to God? Do you know you're loved by God? Do you know that there's some difficulty with the message of Jesus and there's a lot to learn in the scripture, but you know that the actual invitation of receiving Jesus, the only thing that stands in the way is your decision to say yes to him. And so all that to say, you guys have done, a group of you especially have done that and have led the way. And if I can just real quick, and then I'll get into get to it, man, just hang on. But if I can just brag on you for a second, because I don't ever talk about this and many of you don't realize this, but we've seen God do so much. I mean, my wife and I were just kind of reminiscing this weekend. I'll share a little bit about this in a second, but all that God has done. And we're not the biggest in the world, but we continue to grow. But what you don't know, because we don't ever share it, is you have become extraordinarily influential. Because whether you realize it or not, again, because stylistically it looks a lot the same what everybody else is doing, but it is very hard to lead a church where you're faithful to the scriptures and the message of Jesus, inspiring people to follow Jesus while simultaneously skeptics and cynics love attending. And that's what you've created. I mean, some of you, I look around and want to call you out because it's but you've been following Jesus for a long time. And you continue to grow and be inspired, but you also continue to reach people who are far from God. And so people have taken note. I spent this summer, I haven't shared this with anybody, but I spent this summer coaching other churches who want to know what you are doing, because it's easy to reach kind of one side of the lane or the other. It's very difficult to do what you are doing in your community. And so in Florida, Naples specifically, Georgia, New Hampshire, Wisconsin, and I say on behalf of you, because it's on behalf of you, you're the ones volunteering. You're the ones leading. You're the ones innovating. You're the ones doing what very few people are doing. And so there are churches looking at you to go, how are you doing what you're doing? In fact, this last spring, I got invited to speak at Drive Conference with Andy Stanley about what your church is doing. That doesn't mean anything to some of you, but that's been probably the most influential church in, I'd say, the world over the last 25 years. And if when we started, I could have ever imagined that anybody would learn anything from us, I just would have thought you were crazy. And God is doing that through you. So all I'm saying is this: I love what God is doing in every lane in our community, but God's called us to something specific and unique. You are a part of something really special that some of you don't even know about, that you are uniquely positioned to reach some people nobody else is reaching. But here's the thing: until every person far from God is in a relationship with God, we can't be done. And we can't rest, and we can't relax, and we can't put our feet up. And so that leads me to our plan for this next chapter of CC. And to get there, I just want to give you a real quick backstory. Don't miss a single week of this series. You're just going to keep hearing me say this. I want to tell another segment of this in week 3. And I want to talk about my dad. Many of us stand on his shoulders, even if you don't know who he is, because he paved the way for really all that God is doing. But in about 2010, we launched our church. And I cannot tell you how fragile and small and it was. I got one picture. I don't think you can see it really well. But this is like a service. I think I counted 9 people in here. Can you imagine how intimidating that was? We would text you if you didn't come to church. Like there was 10 last week, there was only 9. Frank's not here. Frank sits right here every week. And we know Frank's not coming to church. I mean, it was incredibly, I remember somebody coming with a baby, and we had no babies in the nursery. We were like, please stay. One day we'll have babies. There'll be other babies here. It was that fragile. I remember the first week when and this is a while, where it started to grow, and we had over 100 people, including kids, and we're like, that's amazing. And then one weekend, it grew to like 200, and we were adding purple chairs or red chairs or whatever to the back of pews, and we just thought revival was breaking out. It was so incredible, and we had to step out and stretch ourselves every step of the way. To give you an idea of how fragile it was, there was one weekend where we needed a $10,000 check to be able to continue to open the doors the next week. And that might as well have been $5 million at the time, because that was more than our budget for a month. And somehow, and as I look back, I don't even know, there was just this belief that God was going to do it, that God was going to be faithful. And lo and behold, this is a typical preacher story, but you know how it ends. We still passed plates and pews, and at the end of that service, we had a $10,000 check to keep the doors open the next week. And I just can't give you a picture of the amount of risk and faith and what a small group of people did. We eventually began to grow. It was a lot of unchurched people, didn't give any money, which is fine. That's what we were after, but it was hard to find leaders. I mean, it was messy. By 2015, we needed some kind of staff. It really started to grow. I had 2 good friends where I was like, hey, I'm going to invite you on staff. We raised 6 months of salary for you. We really don't have the money. So all I have is 6 months of salary and a vision. You interested? And they're like, yeah, we're interested. And they came on, and God began, and again, somehow God just every step of the way supplied. Lo and behold, we had more salary at the end of those 6 months. Then we began to grow, and by 2018, our old campus, some of you were a part of, we were out of space. I know we have some firefighters here, so close your ears. We were violating fire code. It was 3 services, it was 4 services. It was like whatever. We're really trying to figure out, I can't communicate you for the desperation a little bit when we did a vision night, and I was like, it was a vision night with no plan, which is not recommended. I'm like, I don't know what to do. We're out of space, and we need a miracle. I mean, literally. On Tuesday, I got a call from the pastor of this church, Bryant, which I'm super grateful for his sensitivity to God's voice, and he said, I think we might be the answer to your space issue. And so within months, out of nowhere, God miraculously gave us this facility. We had about 100 more seats at every service, and so across services, we had about 300 more. We were like, that's going to last us in a while. In 3 months, those were gone. We're out of space, grew to well over 1,000 people, reaching so many far from God. And then you know the story the last few years. We were in this space for 9 months 9 weeks once we got it renovated, and the world shut down with COVID. And it disrupted everything from the marketplace to ministry, everything. Things were not normal for years. But we knew before we shut down, which obviously we didn't see coming, that eventually we'd have to add more space because we were growing at such a rapid rate. And now that things have begun to normalize, you put that in air quotes, but over the last year and a half, our church has begun to again grow significantly the way we did before the world was shut down and COVID and all the stuff that happened with that. In fact, we're growing 20 to 30% in every area year over year, which is really significant at our size. We grew by 17% in August. We just had our groups launch last week to give you an idea, and we have never had this in the history of our church. We grew, not to give you too many stats, but we grew by 35% in group attendance last week. Yeah, give yourself a hand. That's incredible. We have about 2,600 people actively connected to Centerpoint. Luckily, you don't show up every week or it'd be a much bigger problem. But God's done an incredible, this is just a normal service this summer where throughout July, August, we were adding chairs to our 11 a.m. You know that even now there's people in overflow because even though there's some seats, if you have larger parties, we got to put them in overflow. We've begun to use that regularly. Our 9 a.m. is the only place where depending on the week, we have some room, though 3 weeks ago, we were adding chairs at the 9 a.m. And so you may not know this. I know you got a wife and kids and jobs and school, and so you don't pay attention to this. But once you hit 80% capacity, that's pretty much it. Some of you know that. That it just caps, and we've been there. Many years we were there before we got to move in this facility. We are there again on an average or a normal week. We're at 80%. And then just real quick, our kids' space is even worse. So again, not too many stats, one more. Our kids' attendance is a 45% equivalent of our adult attendance on a weekend. The average church that is like young church reaching young families and young kids is 20%. Post-COVID, you more than doubled that number. We don't really know where they're coming from. I don't know if you have big buses and you homeschool and you just bring kids with you. I don't know. But so this isn't like, we're going to have a space issue in kids. We have a space issue in kids. We're in some weeks, we've been at 85, 90% capacity in terms of what the equivalent needs to be. And then I'm going to make some of you feel really good. Some of you thought you gained some weight recently, and you didn't. We just narrowed your rows together right up against code because we had to pack more seats in here. So we're trying to do everything that we can. So my point in all this, and I can go on and on, I don't think I need to because I've heard from so many of you with questions like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Because it takes a year, 2 years to do anything significant. So we're already at 80%. We'll be way beyond it. Some of you might be, sitting in a tent next summer if you get overflow and you're here late, which is about 60% of you. So I'm just playing. That's true. So we have two options. As we met with our leaders, we have a directional team, elder team, a consulting team. Gavin, some of you know, who works with the strategy. So we have a bunch of teams because there's wisdom in a multitude of counselors. And we had two options. Either we create more space to reach more people in our city with the hope of Jesus, or we're like, what's the other option? And we weighed these back and forth, agonized, prayed, because the other option was this. We just tell everybody to stop inviting people. Like, just knock it off. Stop inviting people, and we'd be good. And to be honest, because I hear this from people all the time, it would be easy for us to get comfortable. If I hear it all the time, and if you said this to me, don't take this personally, because a lot of people have said this, so I'm sure I'm not even talking to you. But I'll hear often, it's just kind of, church is just right. It's like Goldilocks. Because it's not a small church, but it's not 10,000. It's just right. And I'm like, that's great. But we're not here to make you comfortable. And we're not here to make me comfortable. In fact, when we moved to this location, it was agonizing for me. I didn't really want to do it. There was a lot of discomfort. Trying to figure out every other option. It was like the only other option left. So it's like, well, this is God's will. We can't get complacent until every spouse, every adult kid who walked away from faith, the number of people right now who are leaving the church in our culture, your neighbor, your friend, your in-law, we can't stop until we do everything we can to reach those people in our community. We can't get complacent. And so, chapter 1 was incredible. But we need to write chapter 2 of our story as a church, and we need to do it together because we're the church. You're the church. You are your church. You are our church. And we need to create a space for more people in our community that need a church like ours. And so we're going to reimagine our spaces. And now this is what are you going to talk about? This is the part. So you ready? Yes. Okay, awesome. My wife is ready. So out of all of you, my wife on the front row is the only one excited. So for 3 years, hold on, go back. Go back. Reimagine our spaces. For about 3 years, we met with architects, and I love architects. They always want to win an award for their renderings, and so they kept having all these ideas. We're going to build this building. I was like, no, we've been so slow to build. It's why it was a miracle when God provided this property. So we're like, how can we retrofit our current space? They came back with a price tag of $10 million. We're like, that's not going to work. We don't want to do that. We don't even think it's good stewardship for us, though doing anything is going to cost money. So we wrestled, literally for 3 years. I'm like, you can't retrofit it. I'm like, figure it out, like keep going. And so we just kept coming back until finally, because we felt like we had been given this space by God, we wanted to utilize it to its max capacity, retrofit it long term, and then we'll go from there after that. And so finally, after a lot of pushing, we got to that place. And so here is what we are going to do as a church, and it's going to be up to us whether we do this or not, is we got to reimagine our space, and we're going to reimagine retrofitting our current space to be great stewards of what God has given us and to create more space for more people. This is the lobby that we're going to build out. This is where you stand every single weekend in 110-degree heat. This is the inside of the lobby where you will not get trampled in the future, that you can actually stop after a full service and grab coffee and create community in that space. And then what we are going to do is and there's also going to be an entrance into kids. It'll look cooler than that, but we'll be able to have a lobby entrance into kids. And then we are going to expand our auditorium through the current lobby. And we don't have to shut down to do any of this. Problem with a lot of the things where we'd have to shut down for months, that was not a good option. Maybe a couple weeks right before it opens, but not any more significant time. You may have to come in a side entrance, but you'll be okay. So this is going to a little more than double our seating. This is going to lead us to a little over 800 seats. And again, I know you got a job and a life, so you don't think about this stuff. But everybody will tell you at our size and our level of percentage growth now over a period of time, that at that size, when you hit 80%, if you are able to raise the ceiling, you fill up that space. We saw it when we moved in this facility. We thought it'd take years. It took 3 months. So this may seem big to you, and it is, and hopefully this will give us a runway of some growth. But the thing is, at the rate that we're growing over time, when you raise the lid on the 80%, you fill up space quicker than you can imagine. So this is the stage view of that seating, and then we're going to expand. I don't have the pictures right now. We're going to expand the kids' space in both directions, more than double our space, so that when we fill this up at 80%, we're going to have more than enough kids' space. In fact, when you drive in the driveway closest to the end, we're going to extend that out. We're going to build 2 new smaller auditoriums so that we can now, rather than rotating, we can have an elementary space and a preschool space, which is going to be incredible. And I thought I'd hear from some of you CC Kids people, but that's fine. So I'm going to hurry. Let me tell you about one other thing that's super cool that we're hoping to launch this year. We just signed a contract a week ago with Pathways Learning Academies that we're launching a preschool on our site. Yeah. I'm just laughing because I felt like that was the thing that people got most excited about at the 9 a.m. too. It's like, you're starting a preschool. So we're not in the preschool business. They're doing this all on their own. We partnered with them. I think they're the best in the nation. They're all over the nation. We've worked for years because when we moved in this facility, we wanted to be great stewards Monday through Friday when we're not using this space as much. And so what this will do will be a massive impact in reaching young families. It's not inherently Christian. We didn't want that. It is an incredible preschool. We want to reach people in our city and community. That's what our church is about. And it will bring revenue back into ministry and specifically these buildings and be a great stewardship of space, which is what we are trying to do. And so depending on what we do, they're going to move in this next year, it could be sooner rather than later, at a reduced capacity, and then they're just going to expand as we expand. So we're really excited about this. So I want to say all this to go listen. You don't have to believe me, but this is all about reaching people that nobody else is reaching and doing what nobody else is doing. We have been uniquely positioned to do something unique in our community and in our city, which means, because you're the church, you have been uniquely positioned. You have been uniquely positioned to do something bold that's bigger than you, that's bigger than us. It's even bigger than your little life, to reach people who are far from God, who need what you're doing. And I'm talking bold. Like, this is the bold part. And I wanted something to illustrate this. So I'm talking bolder than my outfits when we started Centerpoint. That's how bold I'm talking. I didn't need the wow, so you can keep that to yourself. Take that off of there. I didn't need you to do that. But it's a white cutoff jean jacket. So I'm talking about bolder then that is what I'm going to ask us to do. And here's the thing. This is not, and if you know, many of you have been around here from the beginning, you know this already, but for the rest of you, this is not about bigger buildings. I'm not a bigger buildings guy. This is about reimagining together this next chapter of Centerpoint story for the sake of our community. And for some of you, that's deeply personal to you. What we want to do is reimagine not a building, but thousands of more stories of life change among people in our community that are looking for hope. And I've said this from the beginning, so I'll say it one more time today. If you're looking to be comfortable, this probably wasn't the church for you anyway. We're not looking to be comfortable. We're looking to change our city and community. And so we're launching into a building fundraising campaign. First I've ever had to do this, so I feel pretty good about the fact that I've lasted until this long. But we're at the place where we have to do something. So we're launching this building fundraising campaign that's going to go through the end of 2026, so a little over 2 years. And we have wrestled and worked and prayed and done everything we could. $10 million was not something that we can do, so we were able to cut that in half. And we need to enter in a project that's going to be, for everything I showed you, $5.1 million. And that's a lot of money. That's a ton of money. I'll just tell you this, because most of you weren't here. This is no bigger than when we were praying for a $10,000 check and we had 12 people. Like, that was just as big a miracle. And so, yeah, it's big, but we have done everything we could to be economical, to be a steward, to utilize the space that we already have. And we got to do something. And air-conditioned tents in Florida did not work well. We actually tried it one time. Ask Justin Elam. Here's what we need to do as a church. We need to raise at least $3 million. And I'd love it if we raise $5 million. Honestly, we have people that are part of our church that could do a significant part of this whole thing. They're a part of it. But I have no idea what God's doing. And here's what I want to say to some of you real quick. You're like, I knew it. All the church wants is my money. I completely get that. In fact, I've been so sensitive to that, probably to an extreme in the life of our church, why we don't pass a plate or anything, because I'm so sensitive to what people have experienced and bad leadership and being manipulated and abused and all this stuff. So I get it. And so here's what I would say to you in all honesty. If you had a bad church experience and that's how you feel, don't give. I don't want you to give. Because you may not believe this, but you are the reason we're doing this. You're the reason that we are creating this, is those that have walked away or had bad church experience, or you're sitting in a seat or online or via radio and you're like so skeptical of the church. So don't. I don't want it to be a barrier. And what I'll tell you we'll continue to do is invest in your family and be there for your student. And if you hit a bump, we're going to come alongside, and we will gladly foot the bill, because this is about reaching you and about reaching people in our community and city. And some of you know this. The only thing that significantly I have ever raised money for in the life of our church is money that we gave away to the community. So some of you already know every single month we do Fourth Sunday. We've also done the large campaigns every year. We are out facing with our partners in the area. I mean, we've become known for that several years in a row by the Greater Brandon, acknowledged as the most generous non-for-profit in the Greater Brandon area. You guys have killed it. So we have consistently raised money, but we just give it all away. And just so you know, as we continue to grow, especially with our strategy, the more money we give away and the more we're able to move into all that God has for us. So this is what we need to do. But over the last couple of months, I met with relatively a small group of people, and some of them from the very beginning who've been a part of this and have launched this and have bled it, they've sweated it, they've just been all in. And so I met with them, and just to give you an idea of how all in they are, before I even got to this Sunday, that relatively small group of people already pledged $500,000 in matching funds to go to that. You can clap for that. It's pretty incredible. And so the first $500,000 is already going to put us at $1 million because of that group of people. So I don't know where you're at. I'll just tell you, there is a group of people you have no idea the sacrifice. You have no idea what they've done. And so we get the chance now to do for other people what somebody did for us that you don't even know their name. But we're here today. God's moving through this movement because some people went first and they sacrificed, and nobody is ever going to know who they are. And so then that brings me to the really bold portion of this, and I mean it. The bold portion of this, because this is going to be new for some of you, is 100% participation with every CC'er to take ownership of this. And I don't know where you're at. And maybe you're at a place where you just need help, and so we want to help you. But for a high percentage, a very, very high percentage, we can be a part of this. And if you would call Centerpoint Church home, hey, somebody from the church needs to, we're the church. We've always done, we don't have any outside support. We're not a part of a denomination. It's always been us funding us and God working through us. It's nobody else, it's us. And so 100% participation. I don't know what that looks like. May not be what it used to be, can't do what you could do in another season, but I bet you could do something. So don't allow, it's not what I want it to be or hope it's gonna be to keep you from participating, because you may not believe this. This is about your faith even more than it's about what God's gonna do through expanded space. And so we need 100%. Maybe you're a teenager, it's like give up a latte at Starbucks. And over the next, just to tell you how committed people, there's somebody that I just met recently that started a small business to give all the money to ReImagine. So I don't know where you're at, but I'm just telling you, there's people that have invested everything into this. And so I'm praying that 100% of us participate. And for some of you, that's new and that's bold because you've never really ever given before, or not consistently, or you give toward Fourth Sunday. And I just want to invite you into this as somebody who's done it for a lot of years, because there is a difference, and try me on this, between consuming and contributing to what God is doing in his kingdom work in a community and in a city that needs what's happening here. I mean, that day when Jesus turned water into wine, that was amazing for the people who got good wine at the end of the party. But it was nothing like the people that participated in the miracle. You want to be a part of what God is doing. And so our deadline, our goal is to submit those pledges by Sunday, October 20th, 2024. So just a little over a month. And literally as a church together, we are going to decide together, because I can't decide this for us, what the next chapter is going to look like and whether we're going to move forward. Here's what I know regardless: God's going to be faithful. But Paul writes this little interesting thing in the New Testament, that God is willing to do immeasurably more than we could ever ask, think, or imagine, but he does it according to the power that is at work in us. For whatever reason, he chose us. And so by the 20th, we're going to answer this question together as the church, because you're the church, I'm the church, we're the church, you are your church, about this next phase and this next step. And the good news is, man, honestly, the money, it's in the bank. It's just in your bank. And so I just had to break the tension a little bit. And you're like, well, what should I give? I have no idea. As much as you can. But I know we need to raise at least $3 million to church. First time we've ever had to do this in our history. And the quicker we can be more generous and plant churches and go on to all the other things that God has. I'll just tell you, in terms of just my faith, it's taken a lot of faith, this first chapter of our story. I shared this morning. I'm just kind of committed in this next run, this next chapter. I kind of want to go pedal to the metal even harder. I don't want to be one of those leaders that gets comfortable. I just think there's too much at stake. And so I don't know what this looks like. Just to clarify, you can fill out a pledge. I'll tell you how to do that in a minute. And that's like, I'm going to give monthly. Some people have already signed up to do that. Between now and end of 2026, I'm going to give a one-time gift. And that may even not be right now. You're like, I'm giving it next summer. It's any time between now and the end of 2026. So it's important to understand that. But it gives us clarity on where we're going and what we need and whether we have what we need to continue into this next phase. So it's a one-time gift. It's a monthly gift. It's between now and the end of 2026. We have some large donors who are trying to figure out things, but we're not banking on any of that. This has to be us together, and we want everybody to be a part. But here's, I think, the better question. I'll get ready to wind this down. The better question is, God, how do you want to stretch my faith? And I mean that. This is not about just growing our church. It is about stretching your faith. And comfort is easy. It's not healthy. God only grows us when we stretch our faith, when we step out. So I don't even want you to fill out a pledge card today. I want you to go, God, how do you want to stretch my faith? How do you want to grow me? Because I've experienced this. When your little bit of faith, when you're like, God, you got to come through or it's not going to happen, intersects with God's faithfulness, your life will never be the same. When you got to pray for a $10,000 check and you don't know if you're going to have a job and you go 4 or 5 years without a salary, like you've got to have God come through. And then when you see God be faithful in that, you will never be the same. It's one thing to read that in a verse. It's another thing to live that. And your life needs that, and you have no idea what God's going to do. So how does God want to stretch and grow your faith? So by October 20th is the deadline, and what I'm asking you to do is pray for boldness to step out in faith. And I think this has the potential to be a tremendous opportunity for our church, because so many of you have been here for a short amount of time. So we kind of get to be on the ground floor together, and you get to own it rather than just to participate. Or to consume. Fill out a pledge card on or before October 20th. And then thirdly, if you're ready to give a gift, and we've had people do that already, the quicker that some of those gifts come in, the quicker we actually hit start and move to the next phases to hopefully break dirt in 2025. We'll see what God does. You can give, there's a drop-down ReImagine link on our website, app, any of those things. And then you can go to this website to get all of the information over the next 2 years. So there's very shortly going to be a bunch of pictures. You can hear from me, though you've heard from me enough today. There's going to be a digital pledge card, all of the information, all of the updates over the next 2 years. Share your story, a picture of an orange-looking me, like all of this stuff is on there at ReImagine, and that's going to be your place for updates, and we'll continue to talk about it over the next 2 years. As you go out today, you're going to get one of these really cool totes. Shout out to Comms team, church where every person can have a seat and play a part. In there is going to be a brochure with all of the information and a link to a digital pledge card. If you need a physical card, we'll give you a physical card. That's easy, but for most people, digital pledge card is what you want and is the way to go. So every family needs to get one of these on the way out today. The other question is, glad you're excited. I needed something from somebody, so I'm glad you brought that. Real quick, I'm gonna wind this down. At the end of the day, there's gonna be a Q&R. If you've got questions, I'm gonna be out through those doors. You can follow the signs, but I'd love to answer any question that you've got. I'm so excited about this next phase. So excited about what God is doing. I mean, it'd be hard for you to imagine what it's like to preach out to 15 people wondering, is God ever gonna do anything through this? But it is up to us. It's whether we do it or not. And I just wanted to say this when I started this, and I'm always really careful about sharing this stuff, but I shared it with some small groups I met over the summer. I just want to emphasize, like, I get it. I'm all in. I'm all in. When we started this, I quit that marketplace job, and please don't take this as a prescription for God speaking to you, because I would not advocate that you do anything that I did. But I quit a job out of nowhere that was doing really, really well. And I wasn't married yet, so I'd saved quite a bit of money. And I gave all that money in that retirement because we had no startup. We really didn't do it the right way at all. Sold a piece of property. I gave it all. Didn't have a dollar left at the time. And I call it sanctified naivety. There was just a belief that God was going to do it. That God was going to come through. And I just say that to say, and even with this initial pledge, my wife and I are already in, and we're stretching ourselves further than we've ever stretched ourselves before. I so feel this. And I just want to say this because some of you have never had this privilege. I mean, I got to witness this in my home growing up. I watched my parents take so many steps of faith, and not just financial, but every kind of step of faith. But one thing I remember going in and sneaking and looking at my parents' tithe checks, and I would get mad. I'm like, this is why we don't have more for Christmas. But they were like constantly stepping out, and it just ingrained something in me. But I'll tell you, like, if you would ask me, do I regret any of that? I don't regret a bit of that. I don't regret a single dollar, because to watch what God has exponentially, the return on investment in terms of life change. And I'll just share this with you at the expense of you think it's manipulative, but it's so personal to me. This is a picture of my family. And a little over a year ago, my oldest three were baptized. And before we started the church, I lost it last service. I'm going to keep it together right now. I didn't have any kids yet. And I determined I wanted to create a church that my kids were going to love. I mean, really, there is a personal, selfish, I just want them to love the church. And I have no idea what's ahead for my kids. No idea. What I'll tell you thus far is that my kids love the local church. They just think this is normal. They invite friends, and their friends think it's normal, and they love it. My kids can't wait to get up, and they come to every service. My daughter apologized to me this morning because this is her first Sunday. She now is old enough. She gets to be a small group helper with the nursery, and she's beyond excited, so she's in there serving right now. And I have no idea what's ahead. There might be bumps in the road. It is pretty typical for college-age students to begin to have a crisis of faith and doubt, and that may happen for some of my kids, and I'm ready for that if it happens. But I'll just tell you, my goal was, even when they hit those bumps in college, like, I'm not sure about the Jesus thing, I want them to look back and to go, if nothing else, man, I'm still tethered to the fact that I love my church. And I love those people. And my experience for 18 years was incredible. I told the story about Lauren. I'm going to wrap it up with this. I lost track with her. I would pray for her regularly. And a couple years into the church, it had been about a decade since we had talked. And, went separate ways. I'd quit. She went another job. Didn't know where she ended up. And she direct messaged me through a social media platform. I don't remember which one. Out of nowhere. It's about a decade later. We're a couple years into the start of the church. And she's like, do you remember? It's Lauren. Do you remember me? And I was like, absolutely, I remember you. And then she went on to tell the story. She apologized for social media stalking, who my wife is fantastic at. And finding the church, because she had no idea I was looking to be a pastor or whatever. In fact, when I did this, I told my boss at the time, he's like, I'm just not seeing that for you. So she had no idea what was coming, but she's like, I saw that you're a pastor of a church, and I started listening to these podcasts. And again, it's such a preacher story. But literally, she emailed me, she said, so I got a hold of these podcasts, I started listening to them. And she's like, through those podcasts, I just wanted to let you know, I found you on, I think it was Facebook at the time. She's like, I placed my faith and trust in Jesus. And she's like, now I'm in Ohio right now. She's around Columbus, and I just got married, and we're involved in a church here. And so I just wanted to write to you and thank you for the church and for what you've done to lead me to faith. And then I just emailed back, and I was like, this is crazy, but you have no idea the role that you played in creating the church that would influence and be responsible for leading you to faith and trust in Jesus. But here's what I know. You have those people in your life. And it's sometimes we just need to be reminded with all the jobs and the market share and your retirement that you're working toward or whatever your handicap is on the golf course, we're all going to live forever somewhere. And we get one shot at this. And so that adult kid, that neighbor, Lauren, the 10-year-old that needs to know that God's love is relentless and unending and never runs out. We get one shot in our community to let people know. And so we're stewards of that message. And in a couple of years, hopefully sooner rather than later, we're going to walk into those facilities. God's going to fill them up because that's just what he does and what he's doing through you. And we're going to watch people go public with their faith through baptism. And we hear the story all the time. We're going to hear about people who are on the verge of suicide get help and move toward health. And we're going to hear about marriages that are rearranged and put back together and people who finally embrace that, man, salvation is only found in Christ alone, and they're going to begin to follow Jesus. And we're going to look back and we're going to be able to say, I got to be a part of that, and I built that, and God used me to do that, or I had a chance to be a part of that. And there's just nothing like it. And here's the thing, we don't know any of those people's names, but somebody paved the way for us. Now we got to pave the way for somebody else. And here's why we do it. Because as Paul said, Christ's love is what compels us. It's going to outlast us and out-impact us. And so let's be the church. Would you guys pray with me? Jesus, I pray that you would move and work in ways that we can only imagine. This is your thing. And so you got us into this. You're going to see us through. And we have no idea what this is going to, this is so new for us as a church, but whatever it looks like, even if we don't get there, we are trusting you. And you're going to show us the way. And so I pray more than anything else, and I mean this. God, I pray for a bunch of people who are a part of our church that this would be the moment to move from consuming to contributing and being a part of a movement of God, something that is going to outlast and out-impact them. There is nothing like it. And so I pray for a bunch of us that you would just give us the wisdom to know what you're calling us to do, that you would give us the courage to do it. And I pray this for our church. I pray in this next season, the flames would burn hotter in terms of our passion, that we would be more moved, more bold, more compassionate, more loving, more sensitive to the marginalized and the hurting and the outcast, as well as people like me and others in this room who have followed Jesus for decades, and that, God, we would build our lives around something that really is going to outlast us. This life is quick. Help us to invest in what is going to be forever. And I mean it when I say help us to change and rearrange our community for Jesus' glory alone. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.